Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're learning Mishna Yisika, Perik Beis, Mishna Aleph, Chapter 2, Mishna 1. Hayoshen Takas Amita Besukkah. If you sleep under a bed in the sukkah, one is not fulfilled, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Now, why is he sleeping under the bed, not on the bed? We'll see soon, maybe. But the point is that he is sleeping under the bed. And now the question is he fulfilling the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah? The same thing would apply if for some reason he'd be eating under the bed or drinking under the bed. All these things that one needs to do in the sukkah, if he did it under a bed, would he be fulfilling his obligation, his mitzvah? And the Tanna Kama, the first opinion, says no, he would not. If you sleep under a bed in the sukkah, you have not fulfilled your obligation. Now, if you remember, we had a case where if a person put a sheet on top of his bed, right? Had a bed, had four legs that extended upward. You put a sheet over it. That also, if he slept there, hasn't fulfilled his mitzvah. Because instead of being under the schach, instead of being under the cover of the sukkah, he's considered being under the sheet. So here we have a little bit of a different case where we're not talking about, the sheet that is actually made to be on top of the bed. In a situation where he's under the bed, that's where he is. So the question is now, does being under the bed and the bed being his shelter above him, does that create a situation where he is, so to speak, under the shelter, under the roof of the bed or the roof of the sukkah? Meaning the fact is he's under the bed. The bed is over on top of him. It's covering over him. So it comes out he's being covered by the bed instead of the schach. Is that considered that he's not fulfilling his mitzvah because he's not under the schach? He's under something else that's under the schach. So the Tanna Kama says yes. By being under that bed, you are now under the sheltering of the bed and not the sheltering of the schach. The Bartanura points out that the only time we're going to say this is if the height of the bed is 10 tefachim off the ground. If it's 10 tefachim off the ground, which is not that, it's kind of high for a bed. If under the bed is 10 tefachim high, that's going to be about 36 inches at least. If that's the height of the bed, then we say the bed actually forms its own ohel, its own tent. It's considered covering over enough space to be considered a significant shelter. And therefore, if you're under it, not under the schach. It's a barrier between you and the schach. Only because, in this case, by the bed, that beds are not typically made for the purposes of sheltering, do we say that the bed will be considered its own shelter, its own roof, if it's sheltering over that kind of significant area. If it would be smaller than that area, we would not consider it a roof, a sheltering at all. And I mean, it's covering over you, but it's not considered a barrier. It's not significant enough shelter to be a barrier between you and the schach. You'd still be considered that you're in the sukkah and you'd be okay. But here in this situation we're talking about where you're under a bed that's 10 tefachim high. So now the bed that's covering over this area of 10 tefachim is considered considered a tent. It's its own roof, its own sheltering. And therefore you are under that and not under the schach. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, he comes to argue. Noegin hoyinu. We had this practice. Shoyinu yeshenim tachas amit b'fnei azkenim. We slept under the bed in front of the elders. Again, they're sleeping under the bed for some reason. Okay? They're sleeping. We slept under the bed in front of the elders. The elders means in front of the sages. They never said anything to us. They didn't say, get out from under the bed. You're not fulfilling your mitzvah. They let us stay there. So that means that they held it's not a problem being under the bed. So we have the first opinion saying it is a problem, and now Rabbi Yehuda says it's not a problem. So what's the argument here? So the way the argument is explained is the following. Let me read it to you. Rabbi Yehuda, who's the one that says it's not a problem, holds that a sukkah is a permanent structure. If you remember, we had this discussion before. Is a sukkah meant to be a permanent structure or like a permanent structure or made as a temporary structure? Rabbi Yehuda says it can be made and maybe even should be made, but he holds that a sukkah is meant to be a permanent structure. A bed, on the other hand, is just temporary, since it is moved from place to place. The beds in those days, they were moved around. When they slept, they set it up. Otherwise, they kind of put it away. So a bed is considered temporary in its place, since it moves from place to place. Because the bed is temporary and the sukkah is permanent, the roof formed by the bed has no significance compared to the schach of the sukkah. Meaning, the schach is a permanent roof. The bed is a temporary roof. A temporary roof a temporary roof within a more permanent roof has no significance. It doesn't count. Okay? So because the bed is temporary and the sukkah is permanent, the roof formed by the bed has no significance compared to the schach of the sukkah. In that situation, when you have both of them, the temporary one has no significance. It's like it doesn't really count. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, one who sleeps under the bed is still considered to be in the sukkah and thus fulfill his obligation, because I'm not under its own roof. If you have a permanent roof and a secondary roof, the secondary roof doesn't really count. It has no significance. And therefore, it's considered you're still under the schach of the sukkah. You're good to go. The Tanna Kama, though, holds that a sukkah is a temporary structure, just like the bed. That's what a sukkah is meant to be, a temporary structure, and made in that way. Since the schach itself is temporary, its schach doesn't render the roof of the bed insignificant, because they're both of the same. They're both temporary. If they're both temporary, what makes one better than the other? So therefore, someone under the bed is thus viewed as being sheltered by the bed, which creates a barrier between him and the schach. Since under the bed is as temporary as the schach is as temporary as under the bed, one is not considered more significant than the other. Therefore, being under the bed, again, if it's going to be over an area of 10 tefachim high, it's considered its own roof, and it separates between you and the schach. You haven't fulfilled your mitzvah. Now, the Mishnah continues. Amar Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said, and Reb Shimon is coming to support the first opinion that being under the bed, you can't fulfill your mitzvah. Masa b'tavi avdash from Gamliel. The sage from Gamliel had a servant, a slave. His name was Tavi. He was what we call an Eved Kanani. He was a non-Jewish, he was a Gentile slave. He wasn't a Jewish slave, he was a Gentile slave. Okay? Shoyayoshin tachas. He slept under the bed too. V'amar lahed Rabbi Gamliel Zakanim, and Rabbi Gamliel said to Zakanim, and he said it like in a passing comment. Re'izim Tavi Avdi, look at Tavi, my servant. Shu Talmid Chacham. He's a Torah scholar. He knows what he's doing. And he knows that servants are exempt from a sukkah. Lefichach, therefore, Yashinu Tachas Hamita. That's why he sleeps under the bed. Meaning, Tavi was sleeping under the bed. Now, here is where they bring down that why did he sleep under the bed? Here they bring down that Tavi did that in order to make room for those who are obligated. You know why you didn't sleep on the bed? There are only so many beds. The one who needs to do the mitzvah needs to sleep on the bed. The one who doesn't need to do the mitzvah can sleep under the bed. So in order to make room for those who needed to do the mitzvah, he left them the bed to sleep on. But he slept under it. But Rabbi Gamliel said, but if he slept under it, he understood that he can sleep under the bed. There's no problem in sleeping under the bed. Why? Because as a Eved Kanani, as a Gentile servant, he is not obligated in the mitzvah of sukkah, because a Gentile slave is obligated to mitzvahs like a woman. And a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, a positive commandment that is only for a specific time, like the mitzvah of sitting in sukkah, which is only a mitzvah during sukkahs, women are exempt. Avadim Kanaanim, Gentile slaves, are also exempt. So Tavi understood that. And that's what Gamliel said. That's why he slept under the bed, because he knew that he didn't have to sleep on the bed. He didn't have to sleep in the sukkah at all. He was exempt. And therefore, he could be under the bed, because under the bed, he can't fulfill your mitzvah. Ulafid arkenu lamadnu, and therefore, Shimon now continues and says, according to our way we learned, meaning, basically, according to our way means that in passing, because Rabbi Gamliel didn't say this to bring out the halacha. Rabbi Gamliel did not say this to bring out the halacha that sleeping under the bed, you don't do the mitzvah of sukkah. He was commenting about his slave. Look how wise my slave is. But in passing, Rabbi Shimon said, we learned from what he said, if you sleep under the bed, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. So therefore, that's how Reb Shimon was showing from Reb Gamliel that he holds like the Tanna Kama. And that's the halacha. If you sleep under the bed, you're not going to fulfill your mitzvah. So we see here that Tavi slept under the bed to allow those people who needed the sukkah to sleep on the bed. It could very well be that in Rabbi Yehuda's case, where he said we used to sleep under the bed in front of the elders, that they were letting the elders sleep on the bed. Meaning they were young, they were the students. They let the elders sleep on the bed. There are only so many beds. They let the elders sleep under the bed, and they slept under the bed. Apparently, you always wanted some kind of a sheltering. Instead of sleeping out in front of everyone, you wanted a little more privacy. But Rabbi Yehuda's point was they never said anything to us. So those elders clearly held that you do fulfill the mitzvah. But the Tanakama and Rabbi Gamliel, we see hold that sleeping under the sukkah, you don't get the mitzvah, and that's the halacha. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.